if AIs really range widely in capability, it seems like we wouldn't treat them all the same with the same degree of respect. We might well treat some as if they were gods and others as if they were trash. And because they just varied so much in capacity or social roles.
The AIs are at this level, right? But human Go players, chess players, shogi players, they are competing here. I suspect that it might happen to science as well. We scientists are interacting at this level. Whereas AGI and ASI, they make theories here. So goodbye to explainable AI.
I mean, supposing you find this sort of AGI that is conscious, this is validated by the fact that when we wire our brain into it, it feels kind of like when we wire our brain into another human, rather than feeling kind of like when we wire our brain into a brick, right? So if you have an AGI model that passes that second person criterion of consciousness, you have the ability that AGI can modify its mind in all sorts of different ways, much more flexibly than humans can with our biological brains. So then you could have a sort of experimental science, like the AGI tweaks its mind in this way. How does it tweak our subjective experience of mind melding with that AGI, right? So you can see a route there to a quite different sort of science of consciousness, which expands our current conception of what science is in some ways.
Welcome everybody. So we got a panel of consciousness here, and whether AIs are just going to be forever digital zombies, or whether they're going to have sentience, whether they have sentience now, what that all means. So we've got Ken Mogi here, who is a Japanese neuroscientist or a Japanese scientist. He's studied all sorts of topics. He's a senior researcher at the Sony Computer Science Laboratories and also a visiting professor at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. He's written a number of books on...
I'm at University of Tokyo now, so...
okay.
Yeah, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. We've written a number of really interesting books. The ones on Ikigai, I think will be really interesting. I haven't read them yet, but I've got my eyes on them. I've been reading Nick Bostone's Deep Utopia, which delves quite deeply into life and meaning in a post-instrumental world. And also we have Robin Hanson, who is a very well-known economist, who is a blogger at Overcoming Bias, one of the longest-running blogs on rationality and economics and all sorts of things. Robin just gave a talk earlier today on cultural drift and some of the dangers there. And pretty soon we're going to have Ben Goertzel when he returns. So yeah, I'll introduce Ben when he gets here. So yeah, welcome to the panel, guys. It's really great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess there might be some difference in opinion about whether AI can wake up, but I think between you two, do you think it matters if AI is sentient or not?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think it's the biggest fudge factor about AI that's kind of a dial people can turn without much, pushback about whether to love or hate AIs. Because I actually don't think we're ever going to get any concrete data about which AIs are conscious or not, because we don't ever actually have any data about which humans are conscious or not. We have expectations and judgments, but we'd never have any data. So that'll give this degree of freedom. If people want to hate the AIs, they can declare they're unconscious and use that as an excuse to mistreat them and to think of a world that only had them as a terrible world on the one hand. On the other hand, if people want to love them and embrace them, they can just declare they're conscious and you must treat them well. And that would be the opposite dial of a world where people had agreed to embrace them and see a world of them as a great world. And that's just a degree of freedom. And I don't think we're ever going to get any data that will pin that down. That'll be a social choice. And it might be done differently in different places in the world. But that's, in some sense, the biggest open degree of freedom that we're going to have about our attitudes toward AI. That'll just be really easy to set that dial. You just can't contradict somebody who has an opinion on their set on it. There's no evidence you could use to, disprove it. And I wonder which way it'll go, and maybe which way we want it to go.
What do you think, Ken? Do you think there's nothing that we can know about the mind that gives us any insight into whether it's sentient or not?
Yeah, I mean,
Empirically?
what Robin said was really interesting for me. I think in order for us to have empathy for the AI, not to use them only as tools, but to treat them as an agent of their own right, I think we do need to perceive that AIs have consciousness. Otherwise, we would just treat them in any ways we like. And also, I think artificial consciousness is very important when you consider AI safety issues. For example, self-driving cars. At the the trolley program. Everybody knows the trolley program, right? So when an agent makes a decision, in the case of humans, we have a process, the so-called free want process, where conscious perception is perceived to be doing the final veto mechanism before doing something. So, we can imagine a future where a rogue AGI would want to control the world, but before pushing the red button or taking the red pill or whatever, if the AI has consciousness, it might actually stop before the act in a way described by free want mechanisms, just as we humans are, have conscience and, so without consciousness, probably, this is arguable, maybe there won't be AI safety. That's one way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Ben, we've just been discussing whether it's important or not if AIs are sentient. For everybody who doesn't know, Ben is the CEO and founder of OpenCog Foundation and also Singularity Net, and has been working on the problem of AGI for decades. And yes, Ed has just also had a Singularity Salon talk with Hugo de Garis in the last session here at Future Day. So welcome, Ben. Would you like to give your views on whether it's important if AI is sentient or not, especially powerful AI as we're moving ahead towards AGI?
I'm unclear what you mean by sentient. I guess you're referring to qualia. Like, does it matter whether AGI has experience or not? I mean, I
Yes.
consider that a kind of silly and meaningless question. Because I tend toward panpsychism, and I think that experience pervades everything in the cosmos anyway. I guess a more interesting question would be, does it matter if the AGI has vaguely human-like experience, or if its experience is an utterly different flavor of conscious experience than that which human beings have? And I mean, it might matter to us, right? Because an AGI with a form of experience more like ours has more odds of empathizing with us in some meaningful way. Whereas if its species of experience is totally unrelated to ours, I mean, it just may not understand us whatsoever. It may be like the intelligent ocean in Stanis Salem's novel Solaris or something, right? So, but I guess if panpsychism were wrong, and if like only certain particular classes of physical system could have conscious experience and others could not, I mean, that's weird and logically incoherent to me. But if somehow that were true, I mean, then it would certainly make you look differently at the potential replacement of humans by super AIs, right? Because then, I mean, humanity dwindling and being replaced by superhuman minds is one thing if the superhuman minds are having a good time. If humanity is annihilating itself and being replaced by philosophical zombies with no experience, I mean that feels less aesthetically satisfying to me somehow. But I don't feel like that's a very well formed hypothesis. Like I don't really believe in philosophical zombies, so it's kind of a strange thought
But
experiment.
do you agree? Do you think that like rocks are just as conscious or sentient as humans? Do you think it matters the degree, even
No,
if you're a panpsychist and you think that there's degrees of consciousness? Do you think it
I
matters
don't
the
think we have
degree
a
of
good.
sentience an AI might have?
Probably. I mean, I don't think we have a good theory of it, right? I mean, there may be many ways to rank different consciousnesses against each other. There might be some scales on which the rock is more conscious than we are, but I mean, certainly there are kinds of consciousness that we have that rocks seem not to have, right? Like we're dynamic on more different scales than the internals of a rock are. We seem to have different sorts of reflective self-awareness than it seems like a rock would have. But then the thing is, if you architect an AGI so that it is doing information processing in the rough manner of a human mind, then my view is that AGI is probably going to have experience with the rough character of what humans are having. And what you're saying is, well, what if it doesn't? What if it's a philosophical zombie? And I mean, I guess the most sensible thing I can say about that is once we get a slightly superhuman AGI, assuming it's our friend, let's try to get it to form a scientific theory of consciousness much better than what we have now. And it can help us formulate all these questions in a nicer way than we were able to at this moment.
Yeah. I mean, but we're still just squishy humans, and our questions are going to be influenced by our knowledge. So maybe our metaphysical commitments are completely incorrect. But yes, I wish I had better questions. Robin,
I don't
you had
have
something to say?
any metaphysical commitments.
I'll make a proposed answer to your question, Adam. I might say, so I would describe it as we understand computation and how physics can embody and produce computation. The question is about whether there's this extra other thing and where is it. But it's pretty clear that for us, if there is this extra feeling that's in addition to the computation of a feeling, it's the feeling that the computation is talking about. That is, we can look in great detail at computation of feelings in LLMs or in human or whatever, and we can see that the feeling that you have is computed in great detail by your context, and we can see what context that depends on. And then we believe for ourselves that we're actually having that feeling perhaps in some other way besides the fact of its computation. But that feeling is the same as the feeling that's being computed. So it would be really weird to have a rock that has a feeling of listening to a symphony when there's no computation in the rock that's at all similar to the computation of a feeling of listening to a symphony. That is, the idea that computations, when they are realized in the physical world and they are computation about feelings, maybe the feeling's really there, that's an extra hypothesis, maybe in addition to the fact that there's a computation, but it's a hypothesis that the feeling is of the feeling that's being computed. I think almost no one is presuming that just things in the world are having feelings that have nothing to do with the computation that's going on. Am I right? Like the dispute is about whether you could have something that was computing a feeling and then there was no feeling. But, nobody's arguing that people who talk as if they're feeling depressed are actually having ecstatic joy in their head. That's the real feeling they're having. Nobody's proposing that as a hypothesis about human feelings, right? The hypothesis is always that the feeling that you are computing and maybe even expressing with your mouth is the same as the feeling you're actually having.
Yeah, Adam, I thought Ben's criticism of philosophical zombie was just because, I think concepts like the hard problem and philosophical zombies have done certain service to the science of consciousness, but um, it has not been very useful in terms of, constructing a tangible theorizing about consciousness. We haven't moved even an inch from the original proposition of the hard problem or philosophical zombie. So I myself tend to stay away from these things because it's not useful. And as Robin said, it's all about computation, stupid, right? So, so the real question is what kind of computation actually correlates with consciousness, and that's neural correlate of consciousness or computational correlate of consciousness question. But then again, since we don't know any method to certify that being, for example, I'm not certain if Robin is really conscious, or Ben, or Adam, for that matter. So it's not really useful, actually, at the end of the day, to talk about the neural correlates of consciousness or computational correlates of consciousness per se. So from, theoretical point of view, I think it would be more productive, for example, to ask if an AI would be able to have a theory of consciousness, when they are interacting with us, would they have an internal model representing the typical conscious experience that we have? Does ChatGPT have a theory of consciousness? I think that's going to be an interesting and more probably tangible question from here. So that's my, take from the discussion so far.
That's interesting. So, do you think ChatGPT or some successor will have a theory of consciousness about humans? Will they be able to sort of model our minds? Will
I don't
they
know what.
think that we're conscious? Will it matter whether they think that we're conscious?
Yeah. What do you think, Ben? You are the one to have.
Yeah, I mean, ChatGPT, no, because ChatGPT doesn't really ground its linguistic productions in experience. That's not what it's doing. But I mean, I think if you get closer to AGI by building systems that connect language with observed reality, then they're observing themselves and other intelligent systems within that observed reality. I mean, then these systems will do their own theory of mind modeling in the Piagetian sense, right? And sure, they may do it better than us. I mean, we're not that good at thinking about, he thinks, she thinks, they think, he thinks, they think. I mean, and I think an AGI could probably do more profound theory of mind modeling than what we do. And I think this sort of theory of mind modeling does correlate with certain kinds of conscious experience. As Robin would say, that's computing a certain epistemic feeling, right? And I think that corresponds with feeling that feeling also. Rocks probably don't have a great theory of mind model of other rocks. Like what it is to be a rock is a bit different from that. But then, I mean, if you extrapolate that though, if you're a super AI that can in detail model he thinks, she thinks, he thinks, she thinks, she thinks to 100 levels of recursion depth, its conscious experience will be rather different than ours, and ours will seem primitive and cockroach-like compared to its, right?
So I'm a social scientist, and I have to say
I'm
that
an antisocial scientist.
when I model the processes by which people come to beliefs, I'm not always assuming they're scientist types who are just trying to collect the evidence. I'd say there's often social incentives to believe things. So an interesting question here is not what does the evidence best say, because in fact, I think the evidence doesn't speak very loudly here, which will give room for social incentives to drive people to positions. And so the question is, for humans with respect to AI, what position will they want to take, or what position will social incentives induce them to take about AI consciousness? And then reversely for the AIs, what incentives and social context and pressures will induce them to what opinions about humans? So I think that's something we can reason about more straightforwardly using what we know about humanity and social science, because in the past, people have often, with respect to other humans, wanted to downgrade their judgments of conscience and sentience when they wanted to mistreat them. And they have often upgraded their opinions about them when they wanted to celebrate them and you know, worship them even. And so then we might ask, which direction will are in such incentives in the near future go toward how we would treat AI? How will we want to see them?
That's a good question. Do we want to see them as sentient, or we want to see them as conscious or not, or tools?
You know, I think that's, well, I was interested in hearing that Ben is not very keen on alignment problem in an earlier session. But I think that Robin's question is quite central to what people discuss as an alignment problem. How do we align AIs with our social life? And you know, one of the things that I'm really interested in is the Wingian uncertainty. Attributed to the late sci-fi writer Werner Winge, in which he states that a super intelligent being is not understandable by us. So, for example, Ben is a really super intelligent person, right? So people from lay people would find Ben quite intimidating. They don't understand what Ben is saying, right? Typically. So that's going to happen to AI now. And, I have a really fascinating case of Go masters here in Japan. I know grand champion, world grand champion Go master. And what he said was, nowadays Go AI is so advanced that even the top pro cannot understand the moves, right? So it has come to a stage when the moves displayed by top Go AIs are not useful because they cannot use the moves in the matches anyway, because it's too sophisticated and it requires too much memory and too much logic and so on. So, it's really fascinating. So the AIs are at this level, right? But human Go players, chess players, shogi players, they are competing here, right? And I suspect that it might happen to science as well. We scientists are interacting at this level, whereas AGI and ASI, they make theories here. So goodbye to explainable AI, and welcome Wingian uncertainty. So when that happens, well, how do you treat a super intelligent agent in society, Robin? I mean, whom we don't understand. You have that?
We have enormous variation in the capacity not only of individual humans, but of human organizations.
Right.
So once you start to see human organizations as other players in our world, you can see a much larger range of variation of capacity in our world today. And a feature of variation among humans compared to other animals, et cetera, is we can communicate more to each other.
Yeah.
And I think as people get more capable and intelligent, they are better able to communicate to each other. I would say, big corporations can probably talk to each other even better than ordinary people can if they want to about at least their key business propositions and plans. So, and of course, people who are more capable are capable of communicating to someone who's so big corporations do marketing, which is about communicating to ordinary people, and they do it really quite effectively.
Right.
You might be more scared they'll communicate so well that you'll be, their bitch or whatever that is. They
Yeah,
will just
I
truck
think
you into whatever they want, but they will certainly be able to communicate to you because, that's what we
yeah,
see in our world today. Very powerful, smart people and powerful organizations are, if they choose to,
Well,
able to
I would
communicate with others.
say my experience with the Sophia robot and other such
mm,
products at Hanson Robotics, and then a smaller robot, the Mindchild bot we're building here in Seattle area now. Experience with these robots suggests that if an AI presents itself in a human-like way, people are wired to be heavily biased to feel like it is sentient. I mean, I don't think we have a practical economic incentive to do that, but people certainly want to. Like they see Sophia there, or Desdemona, the robots that's singing in the band I'm playing in, right? You have these robots there. When people are in the physical space with those robots, they almost always treat it like it's a sentient being, and they're not even that good yet in terms of interactivity, right? And what's interesting is how differently people react to them face to face in the same embodied space as if they see them on a screen. Like on the screen, people often find the robots kind of creepy, but up close, people are empathetic to them and they really want to feel like they're sentient beings in the same space as them. Not unlike how a 1-year-old kid wants to feel like they're stuffy or their baby doll is real, right? It's just for grown-ups, we need it to be a humanoid robot instead, right? Our threshold's a little bit higher. So it seems like we do have that propensity to assume these things are sentient and to try to relate to them emotionally. And you can choose to play on that or not, right? Like you can choose to make an Alexa, and the design of an Alexa device is exactly the opposite. It's designed to make you think it's a utility. It's designed not to make you think that it's a sentient being. Or you could give it a smiling human-like face and have it cuddle you, and then you will have a strong bias. I think it's a sentient
Right. Well, if you
being. No,
take a family of children and adults to a petting zoo, then a pig and a cow are creatures that you respect and treat kindly, but indirectly we treat pigs and cows pretty roughly, right? So there's certainly a lot of pigs and cows in our world who we are not treating very respectfully. And then when you put one in front of you in a, sort of equal relationship in a petting zoo, then you are inclined to treat it respectfully.
but I would
yeah,
say
yeah.
if the AGI wants people to consider it as sentient and lovable and one of us, I have little doubt the AGI could present itself that way. I mean, I think it's not very hard compared
Mm,
to
mm, mm.
making Nobel Prize level physics discoveries or something.
Yeah, what Ben said was really interesting for me. This embodiment thing, because there's this idea, so-called instrumental convergence. No matter what an agent might be thinking inside, from its bodily movements, we can make an educated guess of what it's up to. For example, if Ben is in Tokyo and Ben is lining up at a ramen noodle restaurant, whatever he might be thinking inside, really complicated things, we know that, oh, wants to eat a ramen noodle, right? And so, so embodiment, I think, is actually very interesting medium, I think, between AI and humans. And yeah, I think that's a great point. And so I actually thought that if we think an AI as a sentient being, that would probably help us uh, promote instrumental convergence, in a way. That's how perceived artificial consciousness can help us align with AI. I think so. That's great. So
The modern era is an unusually egalitarian era. If you look on human history, humans have been sorted along very tall hierarchies, and people at the top have been treated much better than people at the bottom. And then when you put animals into that, it ranges even farther. So a key question is, if AIs really range widely in capability, it seems like we wouldn't treat them all the same with the same degree of respect. We might well treat some as if they were gods and others as if they were trash. And because they just varied so much in capacity or social roles. Just like I said, for cows and pigs, you treat cows and pigs very nicely if there's one next to you in the petting zoo, but indirectly our social world finds a way to treat them pretty harshly because that's useful for the whole economy. So why not assume that basically there isn't a single answer to whether we'll treat AIs as conscious? We will treat some of them as conscious just in the way that they will sort of expect you. They will say they're conscious, and why would you contradict them if they're so powerful and you're trying to be nice, curry their favor? You would, accept their pretense that they're conscious, but something that's, a trash bot or something that's hardly worth your attention and that you have incentives to just dismiss and not even notice, you might well treat it as unconscious.
Yeah. I wonder if, I guess what comes up to me is if an AI has a representation of what it's like to be a human, whether it's accurate or not, if it has some value in that representation inside itself, then maybe it will influence the AI in some way to be more friendly to humans, assuming that that representation is favorable, right? Yeah, so if an AI has some form of empathy going on, some form of compassion, then if it can model us, if its modeling function of humans helps it grow more empathy or helps it grow more compassion towards us, then it will tip the scales of the likelihood it'll be friendly to us. I think that's interesting. I wouldn't want to end up in an AI-driven factory farm. I'd rather end up in a petting zoo for AIs to to treat us nicely. Right?
yeah, and on the other hand, I think people in marketing talk a lot about insights, which is a concept related to why and how people regard certain brands like Coca-Cola in a highly regarded manner. And it's sometimes really difficult to tell why people are behaving in certain ways. So, in addition to a model of consciousness or a theory of consciousness in artificial intelligence systems, I think they would need a model of our unconscious, which we are not certain of. For example, people talk a lot about lookism, right? Nowadays, how lookism is not really great. But at the end of the day, we are attracted to people with certain looks. That's different from people to people, maybe. So it's really difficult to account for people's desires and deeply hidden, motives and so on. So I think in order for AIs to align with us, I think in addition to a theory of consciousness, they would need to have a theory of the unconscious. And Robin, you're a sociologist, right? I mean, how do you feel about that?
We'll have a theory of unconscious for what? I'm sorry, I'm just confused.
Unconscious for how people desire and want certain things,
I mean, we already have, say, salespeople and managers, trying to manipulate employees and customers by using everything they can figure out, not just about how they respond to explicit appeals or senses, but using every implicit way you can to motivate and move them, right? That's just part of our world today, is we use all of our tools to move and persuade associates, and smarter people tend to be better at that, which is why they tend to be in, important social positions, again, like politician, boss, salesperson. So presumably AIs would be, if they're good at that, they would be doing that just because that's what we do. I'd like to raise the possibility that the ancients were really like comfortable with and looking for gods in their world. And even though they weren't there, they sort of pretended they were there because they really were comfortable with and wanted the idea to be gods in their world. So if we actually make AIs who vary enormously in capacity and the top end of the distribution is way above our part in the distribution, how plausible is it that our human descendants will get back in the habit of treating some things like gods? I mean, there's clearly a deep human slot there for a thing that could be a god in your world that you could treat as such. And we were pretty disappointed as the ancients to not find that. We kind of made it up, and then we're disappointed when we couldn't make it up anymore. But once it's really there.
Hey Ben, you're just about to release a book, or has it already been released? The Consciousness Explosion, which explores.
Explosion, that the book has exploded all over the world already. That's right, and you can also download a free PDF from consciousnessexplosion.ai. So yeah, this big fat book explaining sort of my vision for what sort of singularity we might get during the coming years or decades, and trying to look at it from the standpoint of experience as well as gadgetry. Like what sort of transition in conscious experience are we about to undergo, and what states of consciousness might we adopt now so as to make the coming consciousness transitions maximally copacetic to us and others, right? So
this isn't just about like alien state spaces in AI consciousness. It's about us as well evolving. Is that right?
Well, that's right. Yeah, it is human consciousness, which is doing the work of spawning the AGI consciousness, and then you have global consciousness of collectives involving humans and technological constructs together. You will have cyborg consciousness. There's a lot of different things going on, and to be a lot more.
Yeah, I want to be around for that. I'd love to qualia dive and experience all these vistas of different consciousnesses that are out there. Yeah.
If somehow you perish in a skydiving accident or something, I promise to resurrect you from your Gmail archive and all your video transcripts. Right.
Cool. Yeah. Yep. My digital descendants will thank you. Hopefully, I survive.
They will. I will guarantee that they do by judicious adjustments to their digital brain matter. Yeah.
Don't adjust too much.
So,
all right. So
a question I have about AI consciousness, which is, we have a standard story about human consciousness. You could tell me whether you disagree with it, that human consciousness is about an integration of all the different modes of input in the human experience. And so you're conscious when you have this integrated perspective of all the things you're feeling and thinking in a moment. And then you have this sort of single integrated history of how you felt as you were conscious across time. And that when small parts of your brain think, they aren't conscious, but when the whole brain thinks in a certain sort of integrated way, then the whole brain might be conscious. So that suggests there's a scale of integration of consciousness. It's not just various kinds of computation that might produce feeling, but in the humans, at least, it's a thing that embodies a big chunk of your brain altogether. So that raises the question of, when you add like arbitrary lumps of computation that does AI, at what scale is it conscious if it's conscious? Because, the boundaries between them can be much more fluid and they can have much higher bandwidth between them. So, obviously, for example, can all of humanity be conscious? Well, there's a sense in which we can share many things, but we don't have the same sense of a personal history consciousness. We don't sort of remember everything everybody did as what we were doing that moment, right? So there's a question:
Yeah, like
at what
Star Trek
unit will an agent
empaths.
be conscious?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, would a hive mind be conscious at at the level of the hive rather than just the individual sort of components within it?
Hmm.
I mean, large
What do you
language
think,
models
Ken?
are an example of having a certain unit scale there. That is, they're this huge system, but they still are being sequential about the responses they're giving you. And that's very human-like. And so large language models are in some sense much more human-like than most abstract AI computations has been in the past.
You
Ken?
know, yeah, I mean, neuroscience has consistently has been showing that we are conscious of only a tiny part of the sensory data that we are getting. So there is this idea of overflow of sensory information. So, for example, when we are walking along the streets, there are many signs that we are missing. People's clothes and billboards and so on. So a genuinely interesting question from here is how AIs can actually overcome this overflow, process or bottleneck of human cognition. So for me, uh, the question of whether AI would surpass humans is probably trivial because they will surpass human cognition because of the very nature of consciousness. You know, we can only analyze a tiny portion of the sensory data. So what if we could build agent which would treat all these chunk of data simultaneously? We don't know yet, and probably in the research of self-driving cars, people are already discovering ways to drive a car much better than humans do. And so I see that's going to happen in many, many areas from here. So I don't think this, anthropocentric concept of humans at the top of computational capabilities, I think it's not going to stay. And what Robin said is really interesting in that prospect. I think, we are not conscious of all things, we humans.
But what's the unit of consciousness, do you think,
Yeah.
Ben? Where do the boundaries? If actually Ben doesn't think there are any boundaries, right? Yes, panpsychism. So, but is there any like steep gradient troughs between like one conscious agent and another that you think is meaningful in this context?
I mean, we don't really know much about the scope of consciousness. It's possible even in the known physical universe, let alone the probably broader universe that will appear to our super AGIs, right? So, I mean, clearly there's been thresholds in the emergence of different forms of consciousness during the evolution of life on Earth. I mean, you have one-celled life forms that seem to have a different sort of consciousness than inanimate matter. You have systems with brains, right? Then you have brains that can carry out reflective self-awareness. You have the emergence of cultural networks and so forth. But one doubts that this is the end of the evolution of different forms of consciousness, right? We're going to see radically more complex forms of consciousness and radically different kinds of emergence among AGI systems. So, I mean, yeah, of course, I mean, there are phase transitions. There's various discontinuities in the nature of
Right.
conscious experience. But I mean, I think we're we're off in one little corner of mind space, right? And it's a reasonably interesting corner. But I mean, I think post-human minds will explore a much broader region of mind space and thus of state of consciousness space.
So human
I
organizations.
I didn't mention this earlier, but Robin Hanson has written a book, Age of M. I did mention it earlier today, but during this session I haven't mentioned it, and it's relevant to discussion. I was just wondering, like, in your view, do you think M's would be able to, you know, they probably don't necessarily talk to each other through their mouths. I'm sure they could share information digitally. There it is, book spook time. Yes, so do you think M's, if they're conscious, do you think they'd be able to do naturalized telepathy in some way through a digital medium? Would that include qualia?
So I think one of the biggest interesting open questions about AI is what would the units be? So for humans, you know, we have organizations, and then there's this very clear scale. There's a scale of a human, and there's a scale of a group, and then various nested groups together. And it's clear that we don't just have an amorphous, you know, ocean of people, that we create these units of organizations, firms, say, divisions, nations, cities, etc., and that those are important units that are much bigger than individual human minds. And so there's some, you know, scale there that makes sense. So there must be such things for AI. We just don't know what they are yet. But Age of M is an analysis of human-like AI. That is, you take an individual human brain and you make a simulation of that. And so for that, we can just go a lot farther analyzing that world. But one question, as Adam is asking here, is one of the things you can do with brain emulations that you can't do with ordinary humans is have more direct connections between the brains. So, for example, I think, at least for similar enough brains, you could do a process where you drove the state of one brain to be like the state of another brain, at least in some of its aspects. So that would be kind of like a kind of telepathy. If you could find the relevant structures that were the same structures in one brain as the other, then you could make the state of one equal the state of the other. And that would be a way that you could just directly feel or think what they're thinking about that thing. I think that's a useful ability for some purposes and would be interesting and novel to us. I'm not sure how often they would actually invoke it, but one example is that you could take a bunch of M brains who think about a question and then kind of just average their brains on the question. Just take the different mental states, and it's complicated and you can't really, you know, understand it very well, but you just average them. And then a group of people basically becomes the average of their beliefs on the topic, and that's a way to produce consensus among a set of brains. It's you know, fairly straightforward. Low
It's what
tech,
did
but it would
Geth do
probably
in
work.
Mass Effect. Eric Schwitzgebel wrote a paper or wrote some writing like it, 2015. I'm sure you would have come across it. If materialism is true, is the United States possibly conscious? Right? Yes. I don't know if that really directly relates to what you were talking about, but I thought it was funny. So,
Well,
do you think the United States is conscious?
This was posed by Scott Aronson as a sort of joke about Tononi's proposed phi measure of consciousness. So Giulio Tononi proposed phi, which is a sort of mathematical measure of the degree of integrated emergent information in the system, like the amount of information popping out from the overall system dynamics above what exists in the sort of sum of the amounts of information in the parts. And then Scott Aronson, the physicist, in his blog said, well, okay, if that's conscious, then the USA must be conscious. The USA has a high level of integrated information. And that was sort of intended as a takedown, because at the time Aronson was thinking, like, obviously we don't mean the US is conscious. But then after that, people start popping up and saying, well, wait a minute. Hold on, why do we think that a collective like that can't have its own species of consciousness, even if not quite the same as a human. Maybe the U.S. is conscious. I mean, it's a big, complex, dynamical system. It's processing information. It's getting inputs. It's giving outputs. It's even reflecting on itself, albeit kind of stupidly most of the time. So, and I mean, I think it's a decent point. Personally, I do think human metasystems could be considered to have their own form of consciousness, but sort of as Robin was alluding a few minutes ago, though, in the domain of humans and other animals, we have the convenience that minds are associated with bodies, which are these quite like distinct physical systems, right? So you can say, okay, I have my own consciousness, so maybe a group of people has its own collective consciousness too. But just like with the distinction between individual and group selection in evolutionary biology, like there's a clear distinction between the levels. If you're looking at human collectives, it's like, okay, is it the U.S. that's conscious? Is it North America? Is it New York City? Right? I mean, it's not that clear where to draw the boundaries. Now that may be okay, and maybe you want to have a notion of consciousness that supports, overlapping systems, each of which has its own conscious experience. It's just a bit different than the way consciousness pans out among animals in distinct bodies, right?
Yeah, have anybody heard of the Hogan sisters, where they've got a conjoined brain and they're sharing some neurons, I guess? There's a thalamic bridge going on. Do you think there's shared experience going on? Because it seems as though, and there hasn't been rigorous studies on this yet, but it seems as though if one sister, is in eye view of a block on the floor, the other sister can know with their arms to pick it up. And likewise, one sister doesn't like tomato sauce, the other one does. The other one has a pie with tomato sauce on it, and the other one screws up their face. Is there some sort of qualia sharing between them going on?
Probably. I mean, this relates to something I proposed several times as a path forward toward a scientific understanding of consciousness. Like, what I figured is, once we can do Wi-Fi telepathy or something where we can richly connect my brain state with your brain state dynamically and turn up and down the bandwidth of this connection, I should be able to engineer something where I can feel your states of consciousness, you can feel mine, and we sort of fuse into a mindplex or a shared mind, right? Now, once I can do that with you, I could do that with my dog, I could do that with Sophia Robot, I could do it with a brick.
Yes.
Then I could actually get the sense of what it is to be a brick, right? And then you would have the question, like, when you mind meld with Sophia Robot, does it feel more like mind melding with another human, or does it feel more like mind melding with a laptop or a brick or something, right? I mean, and this is what I thought of as second person science. In a way, it's fundamentally different from third person science, which is kind of gathering empirical data from a reality that a group of observers collectively classifies as real. It's also different than first person experience, just introspection that we then report on. So it seemed like with brain and brain computer interface and becoming more mature and more flexible, we should be able to engage with others' consciousness in a different sort of way. And like if I wire my brain into yours and I say, yeah, Adam is conscious, then, okay, Robin doesn't have to believe me. But what if he wired his brain into the wire between our brains, right? Then he would directly experience my experience of you even, right? So it seems like these sorts of tools should be a big help in developing some better sort of theory of consciousness. Now, put that together with AGIs. I mean, supposing you find this sort of AGI that is conscious, and this is validated by the fact that when we wire our brain into it, it feels kind of like when we wire our brain into another human, rather than feeling kind of like when we wire our brain into a brick, right? So if you have an AGI model that passes that second person criterion of consciousness, I mean, then you have the ability to, the AGI can modify its mind in all sorts of different ways, much more flexibly than humans can with our biological brains. So then you could have a sort of experimental science, like the AGI tweaks its mind in this way. How does it tweak our subjective experience of mind melding with that AGI, right? So you can see a route there to a quite different sort of science of consciousness, which expands our current conception of what science is in some ways. So I don't assume that our theoretical frameworks for consciousness 20 years from now will be nearly as stupid as they are now. I mean, it's sort of like the theories of outer space before we had telescopes and radio telescopes and spacecraft and so on. Like we just didn't have the right tooling to develop good theories of outer space, right? I mean, we don't
I'm
now
not a
have the right
theorist,
tooling
so
to
I
develop good
think
theories of
we
consciousness.
actually
But I think we
do
will.
have good theories. That is, I think we have a decent story of why consciousness evolved in humans. So you might just ask, why are we conscious? What was the point of making humans conscious? Because most animals don't seem conscious in the same way, at least. And one standard story, which I think makes sense, is that we were heavily social. And so we needed to have and enforce norms. And in response to having and enforcing norms, we each wanted to defend ourselves against accusations of norm violations. And so that's why we basically need to keep this story all the time of what we've been doing and why, so that if somebody's going to accuse us of being bad in some way, we can defend ourselves and no, I did this for this reason. And it was part of this plan. And then that's the reason why we have this integrated, idea of what we experienced in our plans at the time is primarily to be able to explain that to other people and justify our actions. And that's why there'd be this unit, because we are in this single body, then we do tend to be in one place at each time. And we mostly tend to be doing one thing at each time. We only have so many limbs, or et cetera, and we tend to be focused on one thing at each moment. And that's why it's actually feasible for us to tell these stories of what we were doing and why at each moment in time. And that's sort of the essence of human consciousness, is this momentary experience of the story that we could remember later of what we were always doing and why. And so if that's why we develop consciousness, then that's a way to understand why other creatures might have it, and the sort of thing it would be. It would be the sort of thing that let them tell a story of what they've been doing and why, so that it was a story that others could inspect and compare to their behavior and, build on. So, we also coordinate our behavior with each other this way. That is, if you and I are going to do something together, then I have to explain, well, you're going to be doing this and I'm going to be doing this. And then, at these moments, we will trigger on each other to, I'll respond. If you do that, I'll respond this way. And that's part of consciousness too, is to be able to have this story of what we're doing and why, such that could fit in with other people's stories of what they're doing and why. And we can then have a coherent story together of what we're doing and why, to coordinate our behavior, but also to defend ourselves from accusations that we're doing bad things.
Yeah, so I totally agree. We tend to start from self-consciousness, or the ego, when we approach consciousness. But I think it might be the other way around, actually. My mentor at the University of Cambridge, Horace Barrow, who was the great grandson of Charles Darwin, he was always of the opinion that the origin of consciousness is about intersubjectivity, how you can report your own experience to others. That has played a really great role in the evolution of consciousness. And I believe that's a really important aspect of consciousness. So we need a social or ecological theory of consciousness. And in doing that, probably we'll be overcoming the individuality of ourselves, because after all, we are sharing our knowledge together. And ChatGPT, or large language models in general, are aggregates of what humans have been discovering. And, we need to really collect and make a coherent model of all the big data out there, in order to arrive at AGI and ASI. So, I think a crucial insight is that no individual human is capable of being a natural general intelligence or natural super intelligence, right? I mean, we need an aggregate of agents in order to achieve AGI or ASI. So in order to do that, we really need to go beyond the borders of individuality. And if consciousness was nature's answer to how to do it, how to share our stories and data and so on, maybe we can learn something from consciousness. I know, as Ben has been saying, that consciousness theories are rubbish now at this moment. There are no useful theories of consciousness. But if we focus on the function of consciousness in sharing information, sharing visions, and sharing data, I think we might make a useful model of consciousness yet, which could help develop AGI and ASI.
So it's worth noticing that human organizations have to do a similar function of being able to say what they've been doing and why. And that's why we tend to group people together into organizations that have a shared function, such that they can tell, the marketing division's been working up a marketing plan and here's the plan, or, shipping has been shipping this many things, right? And so in some sense, organizations have a consciousness in the sense of having records and a story that they will tell you, that you can elaborate, ask for details about of what they've been doing and why, such that they can respond to accusations that they've been doing the wrong things. That's a thing organizations do beyond individual humans. And they have a memory of it in the sense they have records that say what they've been doing that you can examine. And, but we don't necessarily think they're feeling that as a unit, but I'm not sure why we think that.
What about split brain patients? What about, if somebody has a split brain, it seems as though if you hide one eye from the other, it seems as though there's some sense that one side of the human is aware of something and the other side isn't. But it seems as though in the everyday world they can walk around just like normal humans can, and they seem to operate. So there's probably some useful interchange between the hemispheres, but there's obviously there's a cutoff there. Is there would you classify the brain as even in a non-split brain patient? I think it's interesting to explore the idea whether there's a cohesive singular consciousness within one brain, whether it's a cluster of many sort of gradients of consciousness. Yeah, just food for thought.
I'd say humans are designed to try to produce a single coherent narrative out of the two halves of the brain. And so when you split the brains, they're a little, you're making that difficult for them. But then what they do is, for example, a standard story is when one half of the brain starts to do something like move its leg, then the other half of the brain goes, oh, well, let's get, if that's what you're doing, then I'll move my leg. And, you're basically trying to guess with each other how to do together. This is what we see, say, for sports teams as well, right? A team of people is trying to have an integrated sports plan. And so they watch each other and try to adapt what they're doing to fit in with the plan the other has so they can have a sensible, coherent plan together. Even though they are separate things, often they see themselves as like a team, a unit, or for a set of musicians together in a band, right? They are trying to form this coherent thing together by synchronizing their behaviors carefully such that each behavior makes sense in the context of what the other ones are doing, just like the two halves of the body do for the split brain. It's a similar sort of process.
How much do you think that identity equates to? Is it like for every identity, is there only one consciousness?
What do you mean by identity, Adam? I mean, how are you?
I'm leaving that up. That's up to you to define. I'm just
I
the
mean,
the
in principle, it would seem not right. Like in principle, it would seem like you could clone yourself into two copies of Adam, which have the same driver's license, and which let's say,
what happens if one of them gets into a car accident
well, so
or gets fined?
what if every day you remerge, right? Then you have different consciousnesses during the day, but over like a longer time scale, it's a unified consciousness, right? I mean, I think